The morning sky above New Haven burned orange and red, not from sunrise, but from the fires that had been burning for 7 days straight. Texani pressed his forehands against the crystal window of the control tower and watched another piece of his world die. The Korthak ships hung in the sky like black clouds. Every few hours they would fire their weapons at something new. Yesterday it was the water treatment plant. The day before, they destroyed the main power station. Today, they were taking their time with the last orbital defense platform. Texani was the colony administrator. That meant he was supposed to keep everyone safe. But how could he protect 20,000 Zilani from ships that could destroy buildings with a single shot? His people were miners and farmers, not soldiers. They had built New Haven to be a peaceful place among the crystal caves and silver trees of Kepler 442b. Administrator called Vexlar from across the control room. The chief engineer's voice was tired. They had all been awake for days. The power grid is failing. We have maybe 6 hours before the underground shelters lose life support. Vexlar nodded slowly. 6 hours. The Korthak had been playing with them for a week, but it looked like the game was almost over. He activated his communication device and sent out another message on all emergency channels. This is New Haven Colony requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by Korthak raiders. 20,000 civilians need evacuation. Please, someone help us. He had sent the same message hundreds of times. The answer was always silence. The outer rim was too far from the main trade routes. The big governments did not care about small mining colonies. Corporate security would not risk their expensive ships for people who could not pay. Through the crystal walls, Texani could see Zilani families hurrying toward the underground tunnels. Parents carried their young in soft pouches while the elderly moved slowly on walking sticks. His people were scared, but they stayed calm. That was the Zilani way. Even when facing death, they kept their dignity. A new explosion lit up the sky. The last orbital defense platform broke apart in a shower of metal and fire. Pieces of it fell like burning rain across the crystal spires of the city. Texani closed his eyes. Now there was nothing between the Korthak and his people. In the Fun Communications Center, Trade Captain Luxori was still trying to reach anyone who might help. He had contacts throughout the sector. Traders, freight pilots, even some smugglers owed him favors. But when he called them now, they all said the same thing. Fighting the Korthak was suicide. New Haven was already lost. Try the emergency beacon. Again, Texani told him. Increase the power. Administrator, we are already at maximum range, and if we use more power, we might overload the system. Do it anyway. Deep in the underground tunnels, Elder Keeper Nixara led the colonists in their traditional songs. Her voice was old and wise, and it helped calm the frightened children. She sang about the crystal caves where their ancestors had lived, and about the silver light that would guide them to peace. But young Zaxilai was not ready for peace. She was barely past her first molting, still new to adult life. While the others prepared to die with dignity, she crawled through the maintenance tunnels toward the power station. If she could reroute energy from life support to the communications array, maybe their beacon could reach further into space. It was dangerous work. Taking power from life support meant people in the tunnels would have less air to breathe. But if no help came, they would all die anyway. At least this way someone might hear their final message. Above ground, the Korthak were getting bored with their slow game. War Captain Sethak stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the Crystal City. The Zilani had stopped, fighting back. Their defense platforms were gone. Their military was nothing more than a few patrol boats with mining lasers. Begin the final assault, he ordered his officers. Land the troop carriers. I want half the population taken alive for the slave markets. Kill the rest. The Korthak were reptiles who had turned piracy into an art form. They did not just steal and destroy, they made examples. When other colonies heard what happened to New Haven, they would surrender without a fight rather than face the same fate. Transport ships began dropping from the main fleet toward the planet's surface. Each one carried 50 Korthak warriors armed, with plasma rifles and shock weapons. They would sweep through the city like a plague, taking what they wanted and burning the rest. In the control tower, Texani watched the enemy ships descend. He activated the colony's final message beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies to tell the galaxy what was about to happen. Maybe someone would remember New Haven. Maybe their story would matter to someone. This is Administrator Texani of New Haven Colony. The Korthak fleet is beginning their final attack. We have no defenses left. 20,000 innocent Zilani are about to be killed or enslaved. We tried to live in peace. We hurt no one. We only wanted to build a better life among the stars. His voice was calm, but tears ran down his face. If anyone receives this message, please remember us. Remember that we existed. Remember that we tried to be good. Young Zaxali finished her work in the power station. Warning lights flashed red as life support systems began shutting down throughout the colony. But the communication array now had 3 times its normal power. Their beacon was screaming into space farther than it had ever reached before. The first Korthak boots touched Zilani soil just as Zaxile collapsed from lack of oxygen. She had given everything to send their message just a little bit further into the darkness between the stars. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a prayer to whatever powers might be listening. "Please," she said, "someone help us." The crystal caves deep beneath New Haven had never been so crowded. 20,000 Zilani pressed together in the ancient tunnels their ancestors had carved from living rock. The air was getting thin. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls, making everything look like a dream. But this was no dream. This was their final hour. Elder Keeper Nixara moved slowly through the crowds, her old hands touching shoulders and whispering comfort. She was over 300 years old, ancient even by Zilani standards. She had seen many things in her long life, but she had never seen her people face complete destruction. "Gather close, little ones," she called to the frightened children. Her voice was still strong despite her age. "Let me tell you about the great journey our people will take when the silver light calls us home." The children huddled around her. Their parents watched with tears in their eyes. Everyone knew what the great journey meant. It was the Zilani way of talking about death, but Nixara made it sound beautiful instead of scary. "Long ago," she began, "our ancestors lived in caves like these. They learned to sing to the crystals and make them glow with soft light. When it was time for them to leave this world, they walked into the deepest caves where the most beautiful crystals grew. There they became one with the eternal light. Above their heads they could hear explosions and the sound of energy weapons. The Korthak were not being gentle with their city. They were destroying everything they could not steal. The crystal, spires that had taken decades to grow, were being shattered in minutes. In the communications center, Trade Captain Luxori had not given up trying to call for help. His fingers moved quickly over the control panel, switching between different emergency frequencies. He had been a trader for 40 years. He knew every spacer, smuggler, and freight captain in this part of the galaxy. Freelancer vessel morning. "Star, this is Luxori. Please respond. We have women and children here who need evacuation. Static. Corporate security ship defender. This is an emergency. The Korthak are committing genocide. Surely your company values cannot allow this." More static. Hegemony patrol cruiser. "Steadfast. We are civilians under attack. The Galactic Charter requires you to provide assistance." This time, a voice answered, cold and official. "Trade Captain Luxori, this is Commander Vale of the Hegemony Navy. New Haven Colony is outside our patrol zone. We cannot risk a valuable cruiser for an outer rim settlement. Suggest you negotiate with your attackers. Hegemony patrol out." Luxori stared at the communications panel. Negotiate with the Korthak? They were pirates and slavers. The only thing they understood was violence and profit. There was nothing to negotiate except how many Zilani would die quickly and how many would be taken as slaves. He tried one more frequency. This one reached a mining station 3 systems away. "Station Commander, this is an emergency. We have 20,000 civilians about to be slaughtered. Can you send ships?" A tired voice responded. "Captain Luxori, we heard your beacon. We are sorry, but we only have 2 small patrol boats. The Korthak have a full battle fleet. There is nothing we can do." We will remember your colony in our prayers. Prayers. Everyone was offering prayers, but no one was offering ships or weapons or soldiers. Luxori turned off the communication system and put his head in his hands. He had failed his people. All his years of making contacts and building relationships had been worthless when it mattered most. Young Zaxilai was still alive. Barely. She lay on the floor of the power station, breathing the thin air that remained. Her work was finished. The beacon was now transmitting at maximum range, sending their desperate plea far into the darkness of space. But she could hear the Korthak ships landing outside. Heavy footsteps and cruel laughter echoed through the crystal corridors above. The enemy soldiers were not trying to be quiet. They wanted the Zilani to hear them coming. Fear was a weapon the Korthak used as effectively as their plasma rifles. Some of them were already breaking into the surface buildings looking for anything valuable to steal. War Captain Sethak walked through the city streets like a king surveying his new kingdom. His reptilian face showed no emotion as he watched. His soldiers smashed crystal sculptures and burned Zilani artwork. Beauty meant nothing to him. Only power and profit mattered. Find the entrances to their underground tunnels, he ordered his officers. Use the sonic weapons to crack the rock. Drive them out like insects from their holes. The Korthak had done this many times before. They knew exactly how to break a peaceful people. First, destroy everything they had built. Then, give them a choice between slavery and death. Most chose slavery. The Korthak counted on this. Down in the tunnels, Administrator Thexanti tried to stay strong for his people. But inside, his heart was breaking. He had led them to this world promising safety and prosperity. The Outer Rim was supposed to be a place where small colonies could grow without interference from the big powers. Instead, it had become a hunting ground for pirates. Administrator called Chief Engineer Vexlar. The tunnel walls are starting to crack. They are using sonic weapons to break through the rock. Thexanti nodded. Soon the Korthak would break into their hiding place. When that happened, the slaughter would begin. The strong would be taken as slaves. The weak would be killed. The children. He tried not to think about what would happen to the children. Elder Keeper Nixara continued her stories, even as dust began falling from the ceiling. Her voice never wavered, never showed fear. She told the children about heroes from the old times, brave Zilani who had faced impossible odds and found ways to protect their people. But Elder Keeper asked a small child, "Where are our heroes? Now? Why is no one coming to save us?" Nixara was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled and touched the child's head gently. "Heroes do not always wear armor or carry weapons, little one. Sometimes a hero is someone who refuses to give up hope when everything seems lost. Sometimes a hero is someone who keeps trying to help others even when they are afraid." The tunnel walls shook as sonic weapons hit them again. Cracks appeared in the ancient crystal, and chips of rock fell like tears. The Korthak were getting closer. Soon they would break through and 20,000 innocent lives would be snuffed out like candles in the wind. But far away in the darkness between the stars, something had heard their desperate beacon. Something that did not negotiate with pirates or abandoned civilians to die. Something that was already moving toward them at impossible speed, carrying weapons that could turn the tide of any battle. The Zilani did not know help was coming. All they could do was hold each other in the darkness and wait for the end. But their beacon continued to scream into the void, carrying their final message farther than they had ever dared to hope. Someone was listening. 3 light-years away from New Haven, the human deep patrol cruiser UES Retribution drifted silently through the darkness between the stars. Captain Jake Murphy was in his quarters reading reports when the emergency beacon hit their communications. A ray like a punch to the gut. "Captain, to the bridge," came the voice of First Officer Lisa Rodriguez over the ship's communication system. Her voice was tight with urgency. "We have a priority distress call. You need to hear this." Murphy was on his feet and moving before she finished speaking. He had been a starship captain for 15 years, and he knew that tone. Something bad was happening and someone needed help fast. The bridge of the Retribution was dark, except for the glow of control panels and display screens. The ship was built for war, not comfort. Every surface was metal and plastic designed to survive combat. but the crew that ran her had hearts as big as the weapons she carried. "What do we have, Lisa?" Murphy asked as he stepped onto the bridge. "Distress beacon from the Kepler system," Rodriguez replied. She was a small woman with dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "A Zilani colony called New Haven. They say they are under attack by Korthak raiders." She played the recording. The voice was alien, but the fear in it was universal. "This is New Haven colony requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by Korthak raiders. 20,000 civilians. Need evacuation. Please, someone help us." Murphy felt his jaw tighten. 20,000 people. Families. Children. And the Korthak were animals who took pleasure in causing pain. "How far are we from their position?" Navigator Pete Collins looked up from his station. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy hair, and a talent for numbers that amazed even the ship's computers. 3.2 light years, Captain. At normal cruise speed, it would take us 4 days to get there." 4 days, Murphy repeated. "Those people will be dead in 4 days." He looked around the bridge at his crew. These were good people, the best. They had signed up to protect humanity's interests in space, but they had never forgotten that protecting people was more important than protecting borders. "Captain," said Chief Engineer Amy Watson from her station. She was a tough woman in her 40s who could fix anything that broke and improve most things that worked. "We could use the experimental jump drive. The new one we have been testing. It could get us there in 18 hours. First Officer Rodriguez frowned. "Amy, you said yourself that drive is not ready for combat operations. We could damage the ship. We could even get stuck between dimensions." "I know the risks," Watson replied. "But those people don't have 4 days. They might not have 4 hours." Murphy studied the tactical display showing the Kepler system. It was in the outer rim, far from the major trade routes. No wonder no one had responded to their distress call. The big governments and corporations did not care about small colonies that could not defend themselves or pay for protection. "Pete, what are the odds of us getting there in one piece if we use the experimental drive?" Murphy asked. Collins ran the numbers quickly. 60% chance of arriving with full systems operational, 30% chance of arriving with some damage, 10% chance of, well, not arriving at all. Murphy nodded. Those were not great odds, but they were better than the odds the Zilani had if no one came to help them. "What about the Korthak fleet? What are we looking at?" Combat specialist Tony Clark spoke up from his weapons station. He was a big man with scars on his hands from years of working with military hardware. "According to our database, a typical Korthak raiding fleet has 1 heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and maybe a dozen smaller ships. They are tough, but they are pirates, not real military." "Can we handle them?" Murphy asked. Clark smiled grimly. "Captain, the Retribution was built to fight real warships from real navies. The Korthak have never faced anything like human military technology. If we can get there, we can take them." Dr. Kate Morgan spoke from her station near the back of the bridge. She was the ship's medical officer, a kind woman who had joined the military to help people. "Captain, what about the civilians? Even if we win the fight, there might be wounded people who need medical attention." "We will cross that bridge when we come to it, Doc," Murphy replied. "First, we have to get there alive." He looked around the bridge one more time. Every face showed the same determination. They all knew this was dangerous. They all knew they might not survive. But they also knew that 20,000 innocent people would die if they did nothing. Communications Officer Ben Taylor raised his hand from his station. He was quiet most of the time, but when he spoke, people listened. "Captain, I have been monitoring the distress beacon. The signal is getting weaker. I think their power systems are failing." Murphy felt his heart sink. If the colony's power failed, everyone in the underground shelters would suffocate. Time was running out even faster than he had thought. "All right, people," Murphy said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. "Here is what we are going to do. Amy, prepare the experimental jump drive for emergency operation. Pete, plot a course to the Kepler system with multiple short jumps to reduce the stress on our systems. Tony, charge all weapons and prepare for immediate combat when we arrive. Ben, Keep monitoring their beacon. Kate, get the medical bay ready, for casualties." He paused and looked at each of them in turn. "I will not lie to you. This is dangerous. We might not make it. But there are 20,000 people who will definitely not make it if we do not try. And that is not acceptable." First, Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Captain, regulations require me to point out that the outer rim is not our patrol area. We have no official orders to intervene in this situation." Murphy smiled for the first time since hearing the distress call. "Lisa, sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following regulations. Those people are calling for help, and we are the only ones who can give it to them." He turned to address the entire bridge crew. "I know this is not what we signed up for when we left Earth, but this is what we are here for. This is why humanity builds ships like the Retribution. Not to conquer worlds or steal resources, but to protect people who cannot protect themselves." The crew began preparing for the dangerous journey ahead. Amy Watson disappeared into the engineering section to nurse the experimental drive to life. Pete Collins plotted jump coordinates with careful precision. Tony Clark ran diagnostics on weapon systems that had never been fired in anger. As the ship's engines began to hum with increasing power, Murphy stood in the center of the bridge and thought about the message they had received. He had heard fear in that alien voice, but also hope. Someone out there believed that help might come. Someone believed that the universe contained people who cared about strangers. "Captain," called Watson from engineering over the communications system. "Jump drive is online. We are ready to go." Murphy took a deep breath. "All stations prepare for emergency jump sequence. We are going to remind the galaxy why nobody messes with innocent people while humans are around to stop them." The stars outside began to shift and blur as the Retribution prepared to leap across impossible distances to answer a desperate call for help. In 18 hours, the Korthak would learn what happened when humans heard someone crying in the darkness. They were coming. The UES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, like a ghost materializing from thin air. The ship's advanced stealth systems made it invisible to most sensors, giving Captain Murphy and his crew a perfect view of the horror unfolding around New Haven. "My God," whispered First Officer Lisa Rodriguez as she stared at the tactical display. The Korthak fleet was spread out across the system like a pack of wolves around wounded prey. Fires burned on the planet's surface where the Crystal City had once stood. Debris from destroyed orbital platforms drifted through space like metallic snow. "How many ships?" Murphy asked, his voice cold as winter steel. Combat Specialist Tony Clark ran his scanners over the enemy fleet. 1 heavy cruiser, 4 destroyers, and 15 smaller vessels. "Just like we expected, Captain. They are holding position in low orbit while their ground forces finish the job." On the communications array, Ben Taylor was picking up scattered transmissions from the planet. Most were Korthak voices coordinating their attack, but occasionally he caught fragments of something else. Zilani voices, growing weaker by the hour. "Captain," Taylor said quietly, "I am getting some signals from underground. The colonists are still alive, but their power is almost gone. Maybe 2 hours of life support left." Murphy nodded grimly. 2 hours to save 20,000 people? It would have to be enough. War Captain Sethak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the bloody Fang, watching his soldiers work. The Zilani had put up no real fight. Their small defense force had been swept aside like dust in a storm. Soon his ships would be loaded with slaves and stolen goods, and the galaxy would have another example of what happened to colonies that refused to pay protection money. "War Captain," called his sensor operator, "I am detecting some unusual readings at the edge of the system. Could be a malfunction." Sethak barely glanced at the display. "Probably debris from one of their satellites. Keep monitoring the surface. I want to know the moment our ground teams secure the tunnel entrances." He had no idea that death was watching him from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. On the Retribution, Murphy gathered his senior staff around the tactical table. The holographic display showed the Korthak positions in perfect detail. Amy Watson had outdone herself with the stealth systems. The enemy had no idea they were there. "Here is the plan," Murphy said, pointing to the enemy flagship. We take out their command ship first. Without Sethak giving orders, the rest of the fleet will panic. Tony, I want precision strikes on their engines and weapons. Disable as many as possible, but destroy any that threaten civilians. Clark smiled grimly. Understood, Captain. What about their ground forces? That is where we come in, said Marine Lieutenant Alex Turner, who had joined them from the ship's small complement of ground troops. He was a quiet man who spoke softly but carried weapons that could level buildings. My team can drop directly onto the surface and neutralize their landing parties. Dr. Kate Morgan looked worried. Alex, there are civilians down there. How do you avoid hitting them? We use the non-lethal weapons, Turner replied. Stun. Grenades. Sonic disruptors. Sleep gas. The Korthak will go down, but they will wake up later with headaches instead of dying. Murphy liked that. Humans were deadly when they needed to be, but they tried to avoid unnecessary killing when possible. It was one of the things that made them different from most species in the galaxy. Communications plan? Murphy asked. Ben Taylor checked his equipment. I can jam their frequencies during the initial attack. Once we have control of the situation, I will broadcast surrender terms on all channels. What surrender terms? Rodriguez asked. Murphy's smile was cold as vacuum. Simple. They leave the system immediately and never come back. Any ship that tries to run with Zilani slaves or stolen goods gets turned into scrap metal. The plan was ready. The crew took their positions. Murphy walked to his command chair and looked out at the stars. Somewhere down on that planet, 20,000 innocent people were waiting to die. Not today. Not while humans drew breath. All stations, report ready status, Murphy ordered. One by one, his officers confirmed they were prepared. Weapons charged. Marines ready to drop. Medical bay prepared for casualties. Engineering standing by for maximum power. Murphy opened a communication channel to the Korthak fleet. It was time to announce their presence. Korthak vessels, this is Captain Jake Murphy of the United Earthship Retribution. You have exactly 60 seconds to withdraw from this system or face the consequences. On the Bloody Fang, Sethak nearly fell out of his command chair. Where had this human ship come from? His sensors showed nothing, but the voice was coming through loud and clear. Human, Sethak replied, his voice full of arrogant laughter. You are one ship against an entire fleet. Withdraw now, and we might let you live long enough to become a slave. Murphy checked his chronometer. 50 seconds, Sethak. I suggest you use them wisely. The Korthak war captain snarled in rage. How dare this mammal threaten him? All ships, find that human vessel and destroy it. Show these soft-hearted fools what happens when they interfere with Korthak business. Murphy watched. The enemy ships scrambled to find him. Their sensors swept back and forth across space. But the Retribution's stealth systems were beyond anything they had ever encountered. Time's up, Murphy said calmly. Tony, light them up. The Retribution's main railgun fired first. A tungsten slug accelerated to 10% of light speed crossed the distance to the Bloody Fang in less than a second. It hit the enemy flagship's engine section with the force of a small nuclear weapon, sending pieces of armor spinning into space. Sethak was thrown to the deck as his ship shuddered under the impact. Warning lights flashed red across his bridge. Damage report, he screamed. Main engines offline, weapons at 50%. How did they do that? Before anyone could answer, the Retribution fired again. This time, the target was one of the Korthak destroyers. The human plasma cannon superheated the enemy ship's armor until it glowed like a small sun, then cut through it like a knife through soft metal. There, shouted a Korthak sensor operator. I can see them. 3,000 kilometers off our starboard side. But by the time the Korthak weapons turned to fire, the Retribution was gone, moving faster than their targeting systems could track. Human ships were built for speed and agility as much as firepower. Tony Clark worked his weapons console like a master pianist playing a deadly symphony. Railguns hurled tungsten death across space, while plasma cannons turned enemy armor into molten metal. Point defense systems swatted aside Korthak missiles with contemptuous ease. The technological gap was horrifying to witness. The Korthak were using weapons that were advanced by galactic standards, but human military technology was decades ahead of anything else in known space. What had taken them hours to destroy on the planet's surface, the humans were undoing in minutes. Enemy destroyer disabled, Clark reported. Heavy cruiser losing atmosphere on decks 4 through 7. 2 frigates are trying to run. Let them run, Murphy replied. But scan them first. Any ship carrying slaves or stolen goods gets stopped permanently. Down on the planet's surface, Marine Lieutenant Turner's drop pods slammed into the ground, around Korthak positions like meteors. The enemy soldiers barely had time to raise their weapons before human stun grenades turned their world into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. Turner and his team moved through the crystal ruins with surgical precision. Their weapons fired sonic pulses that knocked Korthak warriors unconscious without permanent harm. Sleep gas grenades filled enemy positions with clouds that sent pirates into peaceful dreams. In less than 10 minutes, the Korthak ground forces were neutralized. Turner activated his communication device. Captain, surface is secure. No civilian casualties. Recommend immediate medical assistance for the colonists. Back in space, the battle was already over. Half the Korthak fleet was drifting dead in space, their crews unconscious or hiding in undamaged sections of their ships. The other half was fleeing the system at maximum speed, abandoning their war captain to his fate. Sethak found himself alone on a crippled ship, facing an enemy he had never imagined could exist. His laughter had turned to desperate rage, then to fear, and finally, to something like respect. "Human captain," he transmitted. "You fight well. What are your terms?" Murphy's reply was simple and final. Surrender unconditionally. Submit to arrest for piracy and crimes against civilian populations. Your crew will be treated according to galactic law, but your raiding days are over. The Battle of New Haven lasted exactly 17 minutes from first shot to final surrender. When the smoke cleared, the Korthak threat was eliminated and 20,000 Zilani civilians were safe. But the real story was just beginning. The first thing the Zilani saw when they emerged from their underground shelters was not what they expected. Instead of Korthak soldiers with weapons and chains, they found humans in blue uniforms carrying medical supplies and engineering equipment. Dr. Kate Morgan knelt beside an elderly Zilani who had collapsed from lack of oxygen. Her scanner showed severe respiratory distress, but nothing her equipment could not handle. "Easy there," she said softly, even though she knew he could not understand her words. Her tone was gentle, and that was a language everyone understood. She placed an oxygen mask over his face and activated a small medical device that would help his lungs process the thin air. Within seconds, his breathing became easier and his color improved. Around her, other human medics were doing the same thing for dozens of colonists who had suffered during their week underground. Administrator Thexani stood at the entrance to the main tunnel, hardly believing what he was seeing. These humans moved with quiet efficiency, helping his people without being asked, without expecting payment, without even being able to communicate properly. Tech specialist Chris Johnson was working on a translation device, but for now, they were managing, with gestures and universal medical procedures. "Administrator," called Chief Engineer Vexelar, his voice full of amazement. "The humans are repairing our power grid. They brought some kind of portable fusion generator. We will have full power restored within hours." Thexani nodded slowly. Hours. The humans had solved in hours what would have taken his people weeks to rebuild. But more than that, they had risked their lives to save strangers they had never met. Why would anyone do that? Captain Jake Murphy walked through the crystal city surveying the damage. The Korthak had been thorough in their destruction, but the basic infrastructure was intact. His crew was already working to restore essential services while his Marines kept watch for any enemy soldiers who might be hiding. Engineer Amy Watson approached him, her hands dirty from working on the colony's communication array. "Captain, I have got their distress beacon converted to a standard communication system. They can call for help if they need it, and they can contact the outside galaxy for trade and supplies." "Good work, Amy," Murphy replied. "What about their defenses?" "That is the tricky part," Watson admitted. I can set up a basic orbital warning system, but they need something more permanent. This is pirate territory. The Korthak will tell other raider groups about this place. Murphy had been thinking about the same problem. The Zalani were peaceful people who wanted to mine crystals and raise their families. They should not have to live in fear of every ship that passed through their system. Elder Keeper Nixara approached them slowly, supported by a walking stick carved from crystal. She was ancient even by Zalani standards, but her eyes were bright with intelligence. Chris Johnson had managed to get the translation device working, and she was the first colonist who could speak directly to the humans. "Captain Murphy," she said, her translated voice coming through the small device Johnson held. "I am Nixara, keeper of the old ways. I must ask you something that puzzles me greatly." "What is that, Elder?" Murphy replied. "Why did you come? We are strangers to you. We have nothing to offer in payment. Your people could have been killed fighting for us. Why would you risk so much for people you do not know?" Murphy was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question, and one that many species in the galaxy would ask. Most civilizations only helped others when there was profit involved, or when they were forced to by treaties and agreements. "Elder Nixara," Murphy said finally, "my people have a saying. It goes like this: the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We heard your call for help, and we had the power to answer it. That made it our responsibility." The old Zalani studied his face through compound eyes that had seen 3 centuries of life. "But surely you want something in return? Land rights? Mining concessions? A military base?" Murphy shook his head. "We want you to be safe and free to live your lives as you choose. That is all." Nixara was silent for a long time. Finally she spoke again. "In all my years, I have never met a species like yours. The galaxy is full of traders who want profit, governments who want territory, and pirates who want slaves. But you want nothing except to help." "That is not entirely true," Murphy admitted with a small smile. "We do want one thing." The elder leaned forward, waiting. "If you ever encounter other people who need help, and you have the power to give it, we hope you will remember this day and choose to help them too." Trade Captain Luxori had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. He had spent his life dealing with corporations and governments who measured everything in terms of profit and loss. The idea of a species that helped others, without expecting payment, was almost impossible to believe. "Captain Murphy," he said through the translator, "you say you want us to help others, but we are not a military people. We have no warships or weapons. How can we help anyone?" Navigator Pete Collins, who had been working on the colony's star charts, looked up from his equipment. "Help does not always mean fighting, Captain Luxori. Sometimes it means sharing food with hungry travelers, or giving directions to lost ships, or just letting someone know they are not alone in the universe." Over the next several hours, the humans worked tirelessly to restore New Haven to working condition. They repaired buildings, fixed equipment, and treated the injured. But more than that, they shared knowledge. Amy Watson showed Zalani engineers how to build better power systems. Tony Clark explained defensive strategies that did not require heavy weapons. Kate Morgan taught basic medical techniques that could save lives. As the work continued, Communications Officer Ben Taylor established contact with the nearest hegemony patrol. The conversation was tense at first, but when the patrol commander learned that humans had defeated an entire Korthak fleet to protect civilians, his attitude changed quickly. "Captain Murphy," came the voice over the communications channel. "This is Commander Vale of the hegemony cruiser Steadfast. I must apologize for my earlier response to the colony's distress call. We did not believe anyone could stand against the Korthak fleet." "No apology necessary, Commander," Murphy replied. "But I would appreciate it if you could establish regular patrols through this system. These people deserve to live in peace." "Understood, Captain. The hegemony will ensure this system is properly protected from now on." Meanwhile, in the detention area of the Retribution, Intelligence Officer Nick Adams was interrogating War Captain Sethak. The Korthak leader sat in a cell that was clean and well lit, with access to food and medical care. It was better treatment than he had ever given his own prisoners. I do not understand you humans, Sethak said, his reptilian voice full of confusion. You defeated my entire fleet, but you treat me with kindness. You could have killed me and my crew, but instead you give us medical attention. Why? Adams leaned back in his chair. Because that is what decent people do. We punish criminals, but we do not torture them or kill them unnecessarily. You will face trial for your crimes, but you will be treated fairly during the process. But we would have killed you without hesitation, Sethak protested. We would have enslaved your families and burned your cities. How can you show mercy to enemies who would show you none? Because, Adams replied simply, we are not you. As the human ship prepared to leave New Haven, the entire colony gathered to see them off. 20,000 Zalani stood in the Crystal Plaza, their bioluminescent organs glowing with gratitude and respect. Elder Keeper Nixara spoke for all of them. Captain Murphy and crew of the Retribution, her translated voice carried across the plaza. You have given us more than our lives. You have given us hope. You have shown us that the universe contains people who care about strangers, who fight for justice without reward, who choose to help rather than to harm. She paused, her ancient voice growing stronger. We promise you this. When we encounter others in need, we will remember your example. We will pass forward the kindness you have shown us today. Your actions will echo through the generations. Captain Murphy stood at attention as his crew prepared to board their shuttles. Elder Nixara, it has been an honor to serve alongside your people. Live well and remember that you are never truly alone. Somewhere in the galaxy, humans are watching and listening for those who call for help. The UES Retribution departed as quietly as it had arrived, disappearing into hyperspace with its cargo of Korthak prisoners who would face galactic justice. But the ship left behind more than just a rescued colony. It left behind a story that would spread throughout the Outer Rim and beyond. The story of a species that answered distress calls from strangers, a species that risked everything to protect the innocent, a species that asked for nothing in return except the promise that kindness would be passed forward to others in need. In the years that followed, when other colonies faced threats from pirates or disasters, they no longer felt hopeless. They knew that somewhere in the darkness between stars, humans were listening. And if they called for help, that help would come roaring out of the void with weapons hot and hearts full of determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. War Captain Sethak had been wrong about one thing.